yesterday's event for the Hard Places so great. We had a great turnout. Had a big race. So I'm looking forward to seeing how much money we raised between the run and the event the weekend before to help out with Cambodia, to help keep kids out of danger, out of sex trafficking and all the wonderful stuff there. The only real negative that I had for the entire event was that I did do the 5K, and that's not really my zone because it's like running and stuff. And like I've said before, running promotes cowardice, and 5K is just too far. Because if something's chasing you, by 5K you either know that you've outrun it or it's caught you. That's the only two options. And so, but not being an experienced runner, distance runner, I had to kind of figure out a strategy to try to make sure that I could, not die. And so I don't know how fast. So I'm like looking for somebody as we start the run that I can use to sort of pace. If you're not really experienced yourself, you need to find somebody else that you think is going to go at a pace that you can maintain for the event. So we start now, and pretty soon I pick out a young woman. I'm like, I think I can go that pace for a while. I'll just follow her in her stroller, and we'll probably be pretty good. So I'm pegging along, following, keeping up, doing a real good job. And and of course it was out in the woods, so there were obstacles and things, and it was tough on her sometimes. And we finally come to this really big hill, one of those separate the men from the boys kind of hills. And so of course at that point I went ahead and let her just run away and leave me. And but I did technically finish and achieved my primary goal, which was not to die in the woods. So it went pretty well. We're so okay with that one. Yeah, it was amazing. But anyway, back to here. Today we're finishing up our series called Perspectives. And one of the things what we've really been pushing is this really basic concept that I believe that much of Christianity, most people in the culture, have kind of gotten to where they're in a reactive mode instead of a thinking mode. And reactive modes only work until things change. And over the past couple years, things have changed. And what we're seeing is that our reactions aren't working. They're not getting us the results that we want. And so we've said what we're going to do over these past 3 weeks and finishing up today is we're going to go back and we're going to try to relay a faith foundation. We're going to go back, look at the biblical principles that underlie how Christians should live in culture, what should be forming our decisions so that we come out fresh and we're acting the way God would want us to act instead of reacting probably in ways God would not be pleased with. And so today we're going to be in Micah chapter 6. If you're going to go ahead and turn on your Bible. And we're going to be looking at one of the things, there's a couple of surprises that are going to come to us in this chapter. And the first one is what judgment looks like, and the second one is how we're supposed to respond to it. And if I say God's judgment, what do you think? What do you picture? What pops into your head? Everybody said fire and brimstone, lightning, California falling into the ocean, something like that. That's what God's judgment looks like. When I say God's going to judge our nation is under judgment because we've rejected God's standards and His principles and are living in ways that violate that. Well, that's what everybody thinks of. But listen, I'm going to skip part way down to begin with. In Micah 6, verse 14, it says, this is the judgment part of it. It says, "You will eat but never have enough. Your hunger pangs and emptiness will remain, and though you try to save your money, it will come to nothing in the end." Whoa. "You will save a little, but will give it all to those who conquer you. You will plant crops, but not harvest them. You will press your olives, but not get enough oil to anoint yourselves. You will trample the grapes, but get no juice to make your wine." In other words, one of God's judgments on nations and individuals is dissatisfaction. The concept that you will be given sufficient, but it will not satisfy you. Does that make sense? In Hosea echoes the same thing. It says they will eat but not be satisfied. They will be promiscuous but not multiply, for they have abandoned their devotion to the Lord. And God's judgment frequently is not lightning bolts. It's simply that in this place that you are, what should satisfy you fails. In other words, you get your new phone, and all you're looking for is the next upgrade because that phone only satisfies you for a few minutes. You have something for lunch, and you'll go to lunch, and you'll walk away going, instead of, Things don't fill you. You can't buy the right stuff. You can't do the right things. And there's a major sense of dissatisfaction. Do you see that at all in our culture? Now, what does this dissatisfaction lead to? Dissatisfied people are frequently angry. Because there are things we know that should bring satisfaction. We know that having a roof over our heads, having enough to eat, having all the stuff we need, we know that should produce satisfaction, and when it does not, it makes us angry. We know that when we act a certain way and we do not get the response that we're expecting, that makes us angry. When things do not go the way we expect them to go, we get angry. Has anybody noticed any anger in our culture today? See, we're not waiting for God to judge America because of our actions. We are living in, at the very least, phase 1 of that judgment of God. Does that make sense? And so what's everybody, if you think about it, what's everybody always wanting to go back? Everybody wants to go back to what? Something, Mayberry or something. Why do you want, that's an old reference for some of you guys, but why does everybody like the look of that show or those 1950 shows? What's everybody like about that? Everybody was satisfied and nobody was angry. And we live in a culture where nobody is satisfied and everybody is angry. So, if we're going to study and figure out what we should do in response to this judgment of God that is very real on our nation, what should we do? Well, in Micah, it gets a really cool thing. This chapter in Micah's going to set it up. He's a prophet from before Jesus. He's going to set up this courtroom scene. It's really cool. I'm not going to read you a lot of it because you don't like to hear me read that much. Starting in verse 1, I'll read you a couple verses. Listen to what the Lord is saying. Stand up and state your case against me. Let the mountains and hills be called to witness your complaints. And now, O mountains, listen to the Lord's complaint. He has a case against his people. He will bring charges against Israel. And what he's doing is he's setting up a civil court. And he's bringing the mountains in, and the mountains are going to be his jury. Now, if mountains are your jury, you got an impressive courtroom. Right? So this is an incredibly cosmic, picture the scale. This is a cosmic scale thing. And he's saying, okay, Israelites, here's what I want you to do, Israelites. I want you to come into this courtroom that I'm calling, and I want you to present, first off, your case against me. I want you to tell me what I've done wrong. What have I done to earn the fact that you're no longer following my guidelines, living according to my principles? What have I done? How have I messed up? And then he says, and next, I'm going to then present my case against you and why you should receive the judgment that I'm describing. Okay? And then, we're not going to read it all, but in verses 3 to 5, he starts talking about his reasons why the people should be honoring him. You should pay attention, he says, because look at all the things I've done in your past. Look at all the wonderful things I've done. And, too bad that's not relevant to America because God's never blessed this country in any way. So he talks about his faithfulness to them. And then in 9 through 12, he brings his charges against them. Let me read you just a piece of that. This is where God says, okay, here's what you've done wrong. And listen specifically to say, okay, is there anything in common with what we're hearing in this thing about hundreds of years before Jesus and what we live now? See if there's any commonality. Because the judgment matched. Let's see if the charges match. Verse 10, what shall I say about the homes of the wicked, filled with treasures gained by cheating? What about the disgusting practice of measuring out grain with dishonest measures, cheating people? How can I tolerate your merchants who use dishonest scales and weights? In verse 12, the rich among you have become wealthy through extortion and violence, and your citizens are so used to lying that their tongues can no longer tell the truth. Well, there's nothing in there that fits us at all, is there? That's so totally not us. Nobody here lies. Nobody's corrupt. Nobody cheats. Nobody takes advantage of the weakness of others to profit themselves. Nobody does that in America, do they? Well, okay, maybe constantly. And so God says, these are what you're doing wrong. And then, of course, he goes back and reads the judgment, which we already talked about, which is dissatisfaction, and then my correlation, anger. So the question that you want to ask, or at least I want to ask there is, I don't like being under God's judgment. Does it make me happy? Makes me sad that my nation is experiencing a form of God's judgment. What do we do to fix it? Because I don't know about you, I'm a problem solver. That's where, as a husband, I have trouble sometimes because, guys, sometimes your wife comes to you and she just wants to tell you what happened today. She just wants you to fill you in on all the problems that she encountered through the day. And what do you want to do? Fix it, because that's what we do. It's like my job at that point is to go, yes, dear, yes, dear, yes, dear. That's just terrible. That's terrible. Yes, dear, terrible, terrible. I feel bad for you, terrible. What I want to do is march down to a workplace and kick some butt. Right? That's how this works in this place. So we've got our problem, and all of us have this problem solving. What do we do? What is God's expectation? And I think the expectation is going to surprise you a little bit. Go back to Micah verse 6. Because he's saying, here's how you fix it. And he starts out with some hypothetical. Will this fix it? What can we bring to the Lord? Should we bring him burnt offerings? That makes sense. God, Old Testament, God likes burnt offerings. Should we bow before God with offerings of yearling calves? They're going somewhere here because most of the sacrifices were not cows. Cows are a difficult sacrifice. They're kind of big. See, most of the time the sacrifice would be a year-old sheep, which is much, much more manageable, or grain or olive oil. You'd bring something manageable. So what if we bring you a really big offering, God? What if you bring calves instead of sheep? Then he goes up a notch. Should we offer him thousands of rams? Instead of just the one or two we've been bringing, should we go bigger because the problem's really big? It's a really ginormous problem. We should bring thousands of rams. We should bring 10,000 rivers of olive oil. Or, that's not enough. Maybe we should go bigger. Should we sacrifice our firstborn children to pay for our sins? Now, obviously, that's not the case. And parents, God never wants you to sacrifice your children. I know sometimes you may be tempted. That is never God's will, okay? Ever, ever, ever. And Micah is not suggesting it. Micah is using it just as what's the biggest sacrifice you could make is to sacrifice your own child. Sort of like God and Jesus, I guess. But anyway, big problem, big proposals to solve it. Thousands of sheep, rivers of olive oil. God, how big do we need to go to fix this big problem? And then, in verse 8, God comes back with what his expectations are for the people who are followers of God in a nation that is under judgment. Know, O people, the Lord has told you what is good. In other words, this is nothing new. And this is what he requires of you. To do what is right, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Where's the spectacular stuff? See, it's weird. He's saying, you ready? He's saying, we reverse judgment by returning to the roots of our faith. Instead of by going out and doing the spectacular, we come back and do the mundane. We do the basics. We get back to the basics, and we do the basics right. And he gives us those three things, and what I want to do is just break them down. Because here's one of the things we tend to do. We overestimate our impact on the global and universal scale. We get this idea that somehow my job, and sometimes we feed into this, is to change the world. Do you know how often one person has changed the world? Well, there's Jesus. Oh, and there's Jesus. And then there's Jesus. Pick anybody in history. Did that one individual really change the world? Let's take Martin Luther King Jr. Did he change the world? Well, his impact multiplied by all the people he worked with changed our country, right? But if he'd have gotten up and done that, if he'd have gotten up in the Washington Mall and made that amazing speech in front of 3 people, what impact would it have had? If nobody ever read Letters from the Birmingham Jail, what value would that have been? No, he was feeding into the people, the one individuals all over the country who were ready to do it. We put a man on the moon, Neil Armstrong. Did Neil Armstrong go to the moon? Yes. Did he do it alone? Well, what? It was over a decade of work, while he's stepping out onto the moon saying one small step for man. There's another guy sitting in the lander. There's another guy orbiting the moon, and there are literally hundreds and hundreds of people back on Earth monitoring and checking and building things and putting things together. One person never changes the world unless his name's Jesus. But individuals doing what God calls them to do in community, that's what changes the world. So we overestimate what we can do on a global scale, and we underestimate what we can do in the local scale of our sphere of influence, of our world, our scale. So I want to talk through to do what is right, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God, because those are the three components. And because I like to mix things up, I'm going to start at the last one. To walk humbly with your God, which means we need to maintain our relationship. Jesus said in John 10, my sheep hear my voice, I know them, and they follow me. See, Jesus said another time, I am the vine, you are the branches, you can do nothing without me. Separated from me, we're worthless. But what do? This is what I do. I see something big, and I get off half-cocked, and I'm going to run, and I'm going to do it myself, and I leave God behind. I get excited because I'm going to, you're not going to do it apart from Jesus. Because, as we've said before, what's the story of the Bible? And if you know, the Bible tells one story. There are lots of sub-stories that feed into it that provide plot and drama and all that stuff, but there's only one story in the Bible. God creates a universe that is absolutely perfect, and the humans screw it up because we're really good at that. And then God sets about manipulating history and working everything together so that he can send his son Jesus to take the sins of humanity on himself and restore everything back to God. That's the story of the Bible. The Bible is God going about the business of restoring everything back to himself, including you. And we forget just how majestic the story is, how amazing it is. I know for me, I kind of lose sight of it, the fact that Jesus died for me, because I talk about it all the time. It's in my job description. And so I talk about it all the time, and it stops being as meaningful and powerful. And I forget that the most important thing in history has nothing to do with politics. It has everything to do with Jesus Christ on a cross and coming out of a tomb. For me. And if I want to change anything, if I want to have an impact in my culture that actually matters, I have to be a person who is totally rooted in my relationship with God. I have to be a person who's totally rooted in praying, because what in the world is going to change anything? Well, God's going to change anything. How do I get God to change anything? Prayer. If you notice, we did a series on prayer before we did a series on politics. Okay? Because without the prayer, whatever I tell you about the politics and the culture will not accomplish anything apart from our connection with God. And I have to maintain that relationship, and in maintaining that relationship, I have to remember all that I did to earn my salvation. All the wonderful things I did that made God impressed with me. Because that's how you get to God, right? Is you do enough good stuff to where you can impress God enough to say, yeah, you're worthy, you come on up here with me. That's how it works, right? Okay, let's just say I sneak down. This is an old illustration, I apologize, but I've been telling it for 20 years and I like it. I sneak down to Charlotte. I don't sneak, I just drive to Charlotte. Once I get there, I start sneaking. And I sneak into Michael Jordan's backyard. Somehow his security's down. I get in. I'm in his backyard, and he's lounging by the pool there. And I look, and there's one of those basketball goals for kids, the kind that are adjustable. And I look, and there's a Nerf basketball. And I go over and I grab the Nerf basketball. Then I walk over to the rim and I crank it down a little farther down. There we go. That's probably 8 feet. That's at least 7. Then I grab my Nerf basketball, or his Nerf basketball, and I run back about 20 feet, and I run as hard as I can, and I jump as high as I can, and I slam that Nerf basketball through that 8-foot rim, and I turn to Michael Jordan, and I go, impressed? And he gets up out of his chair, and he walks over, and he cranks the rim up to 12 feet, and he grabs 2 basketballs, and he takes off from the pool. He dunks them both, turns back at me and says, not really. See, that's what happens when you try to impress God too. If you think you can do anything that is big enough to impress the all-powerful, all-holy, all-complete creator of the universe, you're just crazy. There is nothing you can do to impress him. There is nothing you can do to earn your way to him. There is nothing you can do on any scale to where he'll go, whoa, I didn't see that coming. I am so impressed. No. We are completely and totally separated from God because we are screwed up people who do things that are wrong, and we do them on purpose, and we do them over and over and over again. And the only way we get connected with God is not for us to work our way to God, but for God to come down to us totally by grace. Totally because he did all the work in Jesus Christ on the cross, and there's nothing I can do to earn a penny of it except accept it totally free by his grace. And we have to start with that realization that I am to walk humbly with my God, that I am to have a relationship with a God who loves me so much he turned the universe upside down to get back to me. And I start there. And I walk humbly with my God. And then it says to do what is right, which means we have to live our values. To live our values. James 1:21 says, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you which can save you. Ephesians 4:22, you were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires. Now, there's a heavy theological phrase that will help you understand what it just said. What it says is, there are things that based on God's principles and his nature, you're not supposed to do. Okay? There are things you're not supposed to do. And the heavy theological response to that is, so don't do them. Okay? That's what it says. Okay? To do justice means that anything I'm not supposed to do, anything that goes into God's don't do that list, I don't do it. Follow me? That's not a complicated one. Now, it works hand in hand with the next one because we live our values. We also love our neighbors. It says to love mercy. You know what that means? You know all those things you're supposed to do? Like love your neighbor and care about the oppressed. Do them. This is really complicated, heavy stuff, isn't it? Maintain your relationship with God. All the stuff you're not supposed to do, don't do. And all the stuff you are supposed to do, do that. He's got a list here, but let me just tell you a story to help you understand what he means by do that. Because it says, love mercy. Now, there's a story Jesus told in response to a guy's question. A guy's asking him a question. Jesus says, love your neighbors yourself. And the guy's like, I don't like that. So the guy says, explain to me who's my neighbor. And Jesus tells him, you've heard this story before, but I'm going to tell it to you anyway. Some of you haven't. So Jesus tells him a story that there's this road that anybody who has good common sense never walks on alone. Okay? It's a bad decision to walk down this road. It's a bad life choice because there's thieves everywhere. And you never walk on this road with money and letting everybody see how much you got. You just don't do it. You don't travel alone on this road. Bad decision. And there's this guy, and he decides to walk on this road. Bad decision. And he's walking on the road, and some thieves, obviously, they see him, they grab him, they beat him, they take his money, and they leave him for dead. And pretty soon along comes a religious guy, probably with his little entourage. And he sees the guy on the side of the road. He says, I got important stuff to do for God, because he's religious. Walks to the other side of the road and keeps going. Another guy comes along, he's also religious, and he looks at him and goes, turns to the guys with him and says, he should have known better than walk on this road alone. He got himself in this mess. It's not my fault. It's not my fault he wasn't smart enough to not walk this road alone. It's not, he made a mistake. He's living with his mistakes right now. Good for him. Keeps on walking. Then it says that along came a Samaritan. And we have no idea what a Samaritan is because for us, when I say Samaritan, you say the Good Samaritan, which misses the point as completely as you can possibly miss a point. Because the Jews hated Samaritans like we hate ISIS. I am not making that up. Okay? So let me try that, and try not to get, I know this is going to freak some of you out. I'm trying to get you to get the right visceral response to what Jesus said. So don't freak out. I'm not saying ISIS people are good people at all. What I'm saying is, though, to get the story right, so along comes this member of ISIS who's just planted an IED. And he walks along the road, and he sees the person who's been beat up, and he doesn't say, I've got too many important things to do. And he doesn't say he deserves it. He stops and helps the guy. And then goes another level, because not only does he help him, he takes him to a hotel, leaves him at the hotel, takes all the money that he has, gives it to the keeper of the hotel, and says, spend this on him, and if he needs more, when I come back through, I'll give it to you. And the crowd's going, did you say a Samaritan stopped to help him? Did you say our enemy? What? And Jesus says, which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? And the expert in the law took a deep breath, swallowed a couple times, and said, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus said, go and do likewise. Now, I'm not condoning ISIS, and I'm not condemning the fact that we're at war. Okay? None of that. I'm just trying to get you in the right spot to understand how incredibly strong a statement Jesus said when he said, go have mercy on the person who made the bad decisions, is in the wrong place, the person who's weak and injured. James said, if you really fulfill the royal law according to the Scripture, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Jeremiah 22:3, this is what the Lord says, do what is just and right. Rescue from the hand of the oppressor the one who has been robbed. Do no wrong or violence to the foreigner, the fatherless, or the widow, and do not shed innocent blood in this place. Now, so, if we're going to undo, if we're going to move away from judgment, what do? Walk humbly with our God. We maintain our relationship. We then don't do the things we're not supposed to do and do the things we are supposed to do. And this is where it becomes a real challenge for people of faith. Because Christians, almost universally, and I include myself in this list, although I'm going to do my best not to let you know which group I fall into, tend to be either do Christians or don't Christians. Here's a don't Christian. A don't Christian has a really nice list of the things that God says don't do. Don't lie, don't steal, don't cheat, don't murder, da-da-da-da. They have this list of don'ts, and they probably have them on their wall somewhere. Or in their mind, there's this list of don'ts. And if they're not careful, this type of Christian gets really proud of all the things they don't do. Walk around a little bit chest out. Because I've got this, even if you're not careful, you'll judge other Christians by their lists. You'll look at this other Christian, and they got something on their list you don't have on yours, and you'll go, I would never do that. That's the don't Christians. Then there's the do Christians, and the do Christians, man, they are so about mercy and love and helping the foreigner and the widow and feeding the homeless and taking care of the hungry and all this stuff. They do all this stuff all the time, and they judge you. If you're not careful, you'll judge other people based on how good a job they're doing. Oh, you went to a soup kitchen last week? I was there twice. And God forbid they run into one of the other ones. Because what the don't Christians don't do very well is the do stuff. Because it's hard to be legalistic and have mercy at the same time. It's really hard to be judging people on what they do and then help them. Oh, you should never have done that. Like I said earlier, you shouldn't have been on this road. That was a bad decision on your part. You deserve to be laying there right now. And over here, the other ones, these people, they're so busy being merciful that they forget about the concept that there are things God doesn't like us to do. So they're all like, oh, it doesn't matter that they're violating like every commandment. That's okay. I'm sure God looks the other way all the time because, God doesn't really mind when we clip our toenails in his living room. That's a couple weeks ago. You can go back and listen on YouTube. And the reality is that statement calls us to both lists. Did you see that? He very carefully says, okay, align yourself with God, and then don't do any of the stuff. Make sure you stand against the things that God stands against, and then make sure that you are at the same time living mercy and love and peace and hope in the world. Now, This is an awkward part for me because I got to tell you guys who you are and who I am. When I was in college, I had a professor. His name was Stephen Straley, and he was absolutely brilliant. We would, by the time I got to seminary and took a class or two with him, we would finish an entire class, and the board would be completely full with no English on it. He could free translate Greek, Hebrew, Latin, Aramaic, German, and French. And he would just open it up and he'd write a word on the board, and it was, I don't know what that means. First semester I took with him, I spent the entire semester going like this. Did anybody get any of that? I don't have a brilliant. Well, somewhere around the second semester of classes, I started to figure out what he was saying. I started to get on a wavelength where I could understand him. And I didn't even mean to do this, it just happened. What would be is he would explain something difficult, and I'm a verbal processor. I process things out loud a lot. And I'm a verbal processor, so he'd say it, and to make sure I understood it, I would repeat it back to him, but I would repeat it back to him in English. American, plain old West Virginia English. And what would happen would be he'd say it, then I'd say it back to him, and when I said it back to him, everybody else in the room understood what I said. Because one of my gifts is I'm a translator. I can take what two people say who don't agree about much of anything and say things in such a way that it offends both equally. Okay? Now, I think that's one of the reasons God placed me here is because as you look around this room, you will see a very diverse group. We are diverse ethnically, we're diverse in age, we're diverse in socioeconomic. About any way you can color diverse, we have it. We're also diverse politically. I mean, I don't know, some of you guys may not be aware of this, and you are all sitting down, right? Because there are some of you who've never been to a church that allowed Democrats. We have Democratic voting people in our church. And for those of you who vote Democrat, we got Republicans too. We got left-wingers, we got bleeding heart liberals, we got right-wingers, we got people who I don't want to go there. And all the way, and it's a very, very diverse, very strange group. I like it. Because it's what heaven looks like. Because heaven's not full of white people. There's not like a white heaven and a black heaven and a Hispanic heaven and an Oriental heaven. There's just heaven. And all God's people come together as the people of God, and they represent God. And here's the thing. Here's how I like to put it as far as this church. Our church is a fob. Now, some of you know what that means. Some of you don't. Let me explain it or try to explain it for the ones who don't. A fob is a forward operating base. It's one of our military strategies. And what our military does is we go into Iraq, we go into Afghanistan, somewhere like that, and we will establish in a hostile area a relatively safe place for Americans. And we'll put a small town there. It really is operated much like a town. And from that, we send out people. Now, one of the ways they send out people we don't do, because we will send out people from a fob with good reason, with hostile intent, right? We got to take care of bad guys. But another thing that happens in a fob is we send out people in peaceful intent. We send out soldiers. Some of you guys who aren't military don't even know this. We send out soldiers whose purpose is to make everybody like us. We have people out there handing out candy. We're giving out soccer balls. We're doing lots of things to convince them that the American way of life is better than the way of life in Al-Qaeda or ISIS, that we treat people better, that we value people more. And that's one of our military strategies is the fob. It's a big military strategy. A big piece of our military strategy is the fob. And Spout Springs Church is a fob. We are a forward operating base for the kingdom of God. God sends us into a relatively hostile environment, an environment where people do not stand for our principles, do not agree with what we believe in, who are opposed to us. And our job, we don't do the hostile intent thing, but we are the ones going out giving out soccer balls. We're going out doing races, we're working in communities, we're giving out food, we're inviting them into the fob, we're saying, hey, come into our fob and play basketball. It's a safe place. Come in and take karate lessons. Come in and do all these things. This is a safe place. And what we want you to do is we want you to come in. And some of you guys, by the way, in this room right now, you're not followers of Christ, but you got attracted to the fob. You got attracted and you're in here and you've been here a little bit and you're just watching us. And you're going, this is weird. Because when I go out there, all I see is people yelling at each other. Everybody that disagrees just yells louder. And here it's like, you got people that are so different, and they don't just get along. They actually, this is weird, they actually act like they like each other. They act like they have a common mission, and they're trying to do the same things together. Stephen Covey, in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, said that one of the most important things you can do is seek to understand a person before you seek to be understood. Where you listen, and when you listen to the person, you don't start out by telling them where they're wrong. You listen to hear where they're right, and use where they're right and where you agree with them to build a bridge to where you communicate together and create something better. Does that make sense? Okay. That's what we do here. Okay, can I be very clear with you? That's who we are. We're a group of very diverse people who have decided there are more important things than our politics and our beliefs about cultural things, that we are here together because we believe in Jesus Christ, because we have a relationship with Christ, and we believe that relationship with Christ can be modeled in such a way that it changes the world. Does that make sense? And so when you come in here, a lot of you guys, you come in here regular and you get to know things. You're like, you know what, I love coming here, but it's almost uncomfortable to come here because I disagree with so many of the people on so many things. But we agree on the important stuff. We agree on what really matters, that Jesus Christ can change this world. Does that make sense? Now, I'm being really, really honest about the whole concept here, because it's not really the way you normally talk to people, usually rah-rah and all that. But this is, I would say this is my heart. Now, this is the heart of this church. This is the heart of this church. Did you notice our worship team this morning? Did you pay attention? You didn't notice. That's the coolest thing, is you don't even notice. You don't even pay any attention to the diversity that was up here. When they come back up, look at them. With Jose, it's harder, but look at the rest of them. And look at it. Look at the age range. Look at the ethnic range. Look at the diversity. Look at the diversity in the room. Can I tell my story? I'm going to tell your story. Rachel, one of our worship leaders, and I were in this a bunch of us went to this huge conference in South Carolina. And this always gets me emotional. It's a mega church, huge, huge church. And all these other churches have come in. And we're all in this huge room. And I look around at the room. And it was one of the whitest rooms I've ever been in my life. I'm not making this up. They had one African American on their worship team. They brought him out. He did one song and he went back in. And it's not a terrible church. They're not terrible people. And Rachel was sitting next to me. And if you don't know, Rachel's African American. And I said, look around. I do not ever want our church to look like this. Because up to that point, she almost tried to fit in. She tried to sing white. You know what that means? You know what that means, right? We go back. I can say stuff like that to her. I'm like, no. When you are here, you are you. You are the person God created. I didn't go to this much detail, but she got the point. You are you. You represent the gifts God put into you, and you express them the way God expresses them through you. You don't try to be like any of the other singers. You be you. I think I heard that recently. And each person, we bring them in and say, you be who God made you to be, the way God made. And if you disagree with a lot of people, that's cool, because what I've learned is this. If we can stop and actually communicate, we can get along. If we start, by the way, by yelling at each other, that never works. Ask yourself, how many times has my opinion been changed by a person who was yelling at me? The answer is never, isn't it? Because as soon as somebody starts yelling at me, my defenses go up, I go into mode, and you won't convince me of anything. I'll drive over the cliff just to prove you wrong. But when I listen to people, even if they're doing something that offends me, if they're doing something that bothers me, I listen and I say, okay, what is right, what is true about. Because I found this about when two people disagree, most every time I've ever seen it, both sides are wrong. Both of them are wrong and just in different ways. And all they do is sit there and point out how the other one's wrong. And nobody gets changed, nothing happens of value. But when you step back and say, you know what, you're right about that, and you're right about that, I kind of disagree with you about this. And if I can get them to come back to me, I agree with you about this, and I agree with you about this, but I disagree about this, then we can have a conversation, and God can actually work, and things can be changed. And you know what happens? If we in our FOB can model that reality, that we're not going to yell at each other, even on Facebook, that we're not going to assume everybody else is stupid, because you know what? That person out there right now who's doing that thing that offends you, to them it makes sense. And my job is to figure out why. What is the logic they're using? What is the pain they're feeling? What is the anger they're expressing? All those things are real whether I agree with them or not. Steve, you're getting the meddling preaching again. Yes. Because in order for us to be the true representation of Jesus Christ in this community, we have to be a community that looks for truth and not for being right. Because right now our culture is incredibly angry with itself. And we yell at each other, and we do it all the time, and there are no models on how to do it right. Name somebody who's modeling it. Guess that'll leave us. And are we going to change the world? We're not called to. We are called to change Spout Springs. We are called to impact Sanford and Cameron. We're called to be the FOB, to be the light, to be the salt, to be the city on the hill that the culture needs, that the community needs. And that's what we do, and that's what we're going to keep doing. And that's what I expect of you. That is your pastor's expectation of you, is to be the people who are salt and light, who listen first and speak second, who seek to understand before they try to be understood, and always keep as that central focus that connection with the God and his Son who died for us. Now, I talked earlier about it, about how this is a place where you can come and be safe and figure out whether or not you want a relationship with God as you talk and look at people. And if you're here very long, I do this the exact same way every week because I want you to be comfortable with it. I want you to know that when you're ready, it's going to happen that week. Because right now, what am I going to do? I'm going to walk over here and I'm going to pick this up. And I'm going to say, you've been watching. You've been listening. We've been modeling Jesus and teaching Jesus and speaking Jesus. We've been talking about his grace and his love and how he choreographed history to get you back to God. And if you're ready to talk to somebody about that, then you do what? You pick up a blue bag. And there's some on the corner of the stage here and the corner of the stage there. There's 2 fewer on the corner of the stage there because 2 people accepted Christ during the first service that I know of. There's blue bags on the back on those 2 bookshelves. And if you grab a blue bag, what happens? Somebody's going to come up to you who's been trained. They're going to take about 10 minutes. They're going to unpack the bag, walk you through the contents, and show you how to have that relationship with God so that you can walk humbly with your God. The first thing we talked about on how to restore our culture and restore ourselves. If you're ready for that, today's the day. Now, if you have that relationship, part of being in the FOB is announcing to people that you're part of the FOB. Part of being in the church is announcing, I'm on God's side. I'm not yelling at each other about politics. I'm yelling for God. And the way that you do the initial yell is called baptism. We do the first Wednesday of every month. We put a baptistry right there. We fill it up with water. And we immerse people as a picture of Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection on behalf of us. And we announce, I belong here. I belong to Jesus Christ. I'm part of this revolution. You may have been baptized. Other thing we do every week, we've got a cross over there. 2 reasons. 1, it reminds you why we're here. And 2, if during the process of this conversation we've had, and yes, it's a conversation, I listen to what you're saying back to me. During this conversation, God may have spoken to you. Sometimes he speaks through me, and sometimes he speaks in spite of me into your heart. And if he's spoken something into your heart that you want to talk to him about, or there's something you brought in with you that you'd like to pray about, the cross is for prayer. If you want to pray alone, that's great. If you want to pray with somebody, we've got people over there. You just approach one of them. They'll be more than happy to pray with you. We also have communion stations. We have one in the back here and one in the front. The purpose of the communion stations is so you can remind yourself once again of all that Jesus did for you. Because over time we lose our motivation. We forget the why. We forget what's important. And once in a while, some people, that's every week. Some it's just every once in a while. You want to take communion and remind yourself what Jesus has done for you. And then a third piece, if you're going to be part of the FOB, everybody has a role. Everybody has a purpose. One of the 2 easiest ways to join and become part of the service here is either through our First Impressions team. They're the ones that greet you in the parking lot, hand you a Bible when you come in the door, and everything in between to make sure you feel welcome the whole way through. And if you're ready to be part of this team, First Impressions, we got a table right back there. One of the people at the table will be glad to talk to you about helping people feel welcome here. There's also our Next Generation Children's Ministry. Does an amazing job. You don't have to worry about your kids because they're being taken care of, and when they're not being babysat, they're being taught and loved. They're having a great time. And if you want to be part of that, you'd like to check into that, on the same table is Emma. She's our Children's Next Generation Director. She'd be glad to talk to you about that. It's always about next steps. What's your next step? Now, let's go back to the beginning. Just to recap really, really fast. Micah pictures God bringing the people into this huge courtroom, and there's mountains acting as jury. And there's thunder and there's lightning in my picture. And the world's falling apart, and God is judging. And God says, here's what I want you to do. It's not thousands of rams. It's not rivers of oil. It's nothing spectacular at all. Do justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. And when we do that, we may not change the world, but we can change our corner of it.
Would you